we could be so close, like brothers. The future's in the air, can feel it everywhere. I'm blowing with the wind of change. Take me to the magic of the moment on a glory night, where the children of tomorrow dream away in the wind of change. Walking down the street, distant memories are buried in the past forever.
The Russian presence began, they had a separate program from the rest of them because the Soviet Union, of course, at the end of the war, captured quite a lot of German assets from occupied territories in Eastern Europe, including a base in Poland called the Hinge, where Deglocka was tested. And the Germans, I believe, had abandoned one or two working in Deglocka and enough paperwork that the Soviet Union could reverse engineer it. And they also found, of course, we've talked about stuff in the Ural Mountains, and I believe there was some stuff that was found in Mongolia, that they found some ancient technologies there. I don't know the specifics. This is just stuff I remembered in briefings or stuff that I half observed during various and sundry ops. And one of my alters, Jared, lived in a Soviet colony, or well, a post-Soviet colony, which I guess this is where most of my clear memories of the Russian program click in, is that when the Soviet Union fell, SSPs, particularly of the other Soviet countries, or the various, I guess you would call them satellite states, lost their funding and either fell under jurisdictions of other countries or developed their own programs. Poland, I know, fell under American or NATO jurisdiction, of course. Ukraine, I believe, fell under German jurisdiction. Vietnam has their own program completely independently. North Korea, I don't know about. Let's see, Kazakhstan, I believe, stayed under Russian jurisdiction. But at any rate, the program shrank quite a lot after that, at least for a while. It's slowly building itself back up now, but between then and I would say probably 2014 or so, it was pretty small, really. And most of the colonies that they have on various planets fell under ICC jurisdiction or under German jurisdiction, including the one that my alter Jared lived in. You might have heard me mention him once or twice. He's the xenoarchaeologist. Yeah, he lived there in the mid-90s, so not long after the fall of the Soviet Union. And that colony, I believe it was New Minsk. It was quite large, and it had a very diverse population of people from all over the Soviet Union. It still had the same population, of course, as it historically had, but it was poor, fairly not well off, and it was, like I mentioned, under ICC control by that point. I have heard from some people that there are still some of those old colonies that are still in existence, actually, and that they still have a communist ideology, but those are very rare. I have no memories of encountering one myself. I can also say that during that period in the 90s, when Russia and the States were quite friendly, that there was a lot of personnel exchange happening at Montauk. This is Kyle memories. During that period, there were a lot of Russians coming into Montauk, and I would assume to other American SSPs, and there were a lot of Americans being exchanged over to the Russian SSPs. That pretty much stopped at the time that relations began to sour again. But there were, even then, even when things were friendly, there were oversteps, to put it nicely, on both sides. the Americans did kidnap some Russian assets that they just wanted, and the Russians kidnapped a few American assets that they just wanted. You know, SSP is really corrupt universally. That needs to be made very clear. Like, no country has a better SSP than any other one, I would say. Okay, I think that's about what I have to say on the Russian side.
All right, so tell me, how did you get into this Russian program from the beginning?
Yeah. Well, as people may know from other interviews, I was raised in the American program. I went through the Montauk Project, and I was brought to many different places around the world and across the solar system. When I was about 7, I was traded to the Russians, or the Soviets at the time, because this was my original body. So this was still during the Soviet period. And basically the Air Force intelligence people, those were my bosses, had some sort of trade agreement with the Russians. So we would give them some of our assets, they would give us some of their assets, you know, kind of just horse trading.
Like an exchange program, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the Soviets were very excited to have me. It was a totally different working environment. I touched on that with John a little bit. But it was honestly a relief, because working for the Americans was just constant brutality. And the Russians were a lot kinder to me. There was a more relaxed, you know, work culture, and I mean, I was still a child, you know, being used against my will. So the situation is still very unpleasant, to make a major understatement. But yeah, the Russians were not so obsessed with torture. The Americans tried to work torture into everything, like even when it wasn't necessary or helpful or efficient. You know, they're sadists, and they use a lot of different kinds of torture. The Russian mind control program, I mean, there was torture going on for some people, but it wasn't just used wantonly in the same way. So honestly, it's a lot easier to remember my time with the Russians than it is to remember my time with the Americans.
Wow.
Yeah, which is ironic.
Can you
But,
can you start from the context of what you remember, you know, first happened, and where you were, and how all this exchange happened, if you remember
Sure.
anything about this?
Yeah. The initial trade, I believe, happened in Oslo, Norway, where the Americans and the Russians met. And yeah, I was taken in with a group of, they're mostly middle-aged officers on the Russian side, who I went with. And they took me to Eastern Russia. So I saw a little bit of the planet side operations of the Russians. I don't know exact locations, but the place we launched from was near the Volga River.
Oh, okay.
And
you know that how?
From the things people were saying at the time. I mean, some, you know, the people that were talking to me spoke English, and also just the people talking among themselves in Russian, I picked up a little bit of what was going on.
Okay.
And again, that was very unusual. If this was American stuff, like, I would be like totally sedated on drugs. You know, I would not be allowed to just like hear random things.
Okay.
So I had a little context.
So you were, before you were traded, you were at Montauk, right?
Originally, yeah.
Okay.
After that, I was all over the place.
So you don't know if you went from Montauk to Norway and then to Russia. You don't know that. You don't know the point of origin. I mean,
No, I actually came from Germany before that.
Oh, okay.
There's a big Air Force base in Bavaria in Germany.
Hmm.
So that's where I was immediately before Norway.
I see.
Um,
Okay.
a lot of my abuse is connected to different Air Force places around the world, US Air Force places. So that was
Okay.
one.
Got
That
it.
was where I was coming from. Yeah.
So
Um,
Montauk was just a quote unquote training base for you, like a preparation
yeah,
for later programs.
yeah,
Yes.
more
Okay.
or less. For a
Uh-huh.
lot of us, in the secret space programs, that was kind of the our initial training. And then after that, we were sent all kinds of different places. So that was
Hmm.
the case for me. Yeah.
Okay. So they spoke English to you. You were alone, right? You were alone in this exchange as as an
Yeah.
American child.
Yeah. In those
Okay.
exchanges. Yeah.
All right.
Apparently I was considered very valuable because I tested very highly on some of the psychic skills tests, and I was working as a navigator. I could interface with Zeta Reticulan technology. I could fly their ships.
Hmm.
And this was very, very rare for humans to be able to do. Um, so that might have been part of the reason I was alone at that time. I was just considered a valuable asset. Um, and the Russians or the Soviets were just very interested in um, seeing what I could do. Like I apparently, yeah, I had a big dossier. Like it was like they thought it was a big deal because I was, considered valuable. Um, I don't really I believe any of this today, but that was
What
the situation.
what do you mean you don't believe it?
I just mean my values today are more that, that humans are equally valuable,
Oh, okay.
just
All
in
right.
a global sense. Yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah. So they basically put me through a lot of different tests. There were um when I got to the Russian bases, um I wasn't planet side very long because they sent me up to a base in Saturn's rings. Um
Hmm.
so this is still the case today. Basically all the powerful nations have bases in the rings of Saturn. Um
Like inside the rings themselves or beside the rings on a station, something like that?
yeah, like on stations that are built into some of the asteroids.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so just I mean, into the rings themselves as we know them, right?
Hmm.
Inside. Okay.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and one of them was obviously a Soviet base there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the one I was taken to. Um, yeah, the ships were a different design. They were bigger, they were more boxy. Um, yeah, it just had a different feel to them. Um, a lot of the
Can you describe the ship that you launched on from Russia?
um, I don't have a lot of memory of it. The trip was pretty short. Um,
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure we just went into a Zeta Reticulan scout ship, which would
Okay.
be um, basically a small saucer type craft. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Interesting. So
So
that means they were cooperating with the Zetas and
yeah,
hence the interest in you because you were able to operate their tech. Okay.
yeah, that's true. Hmm.
Uh-huh. So the tests that they put you through, can you describe them? What was happening there?
Um, well, there were some written kind of like intellectual based tests
Hmm.
um, that were, I guess I can roughly compare them to IQ tests. Um, then there were more psychic tests where they essentially just put me in front of this big interface to see if I could make certain things light up on the
Hmm.
interface. And it was a big clunky thing. It looked like an 80s computer thing.
Okay.
um,
So
and
you were supposed to turn it on with your mind or something?
mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
I was supposed to. There was something, I guess I could call it a switchboard, where I was supposed to run my mental energy through different places on the board and make
Okay.
different lights come on.
Okay.
Um, so that was one. Um, yeah, I found that one fairly easy. Um, Essentially, I mean, everything that the Russians had come up with was pretty simple, you know, compared to what the Zeta were using, um, and the Americans had reverse engineered a lot of the Zeta stuff.
Hmm.
Um, so the Russian hardware was comparatively simple, and a lot of it was just, you know, it was just very ordinary looking kind of 80s, yeah, 80s stuff.
Okay.
Well, they sent some of their psychics in, and that was interesting because they, you know, each faction has their own telepaths.
Hmm.
So they would send in adult telepaths, just to interface with me and um, kind of talk inside of our minds. Um, so, and again, I just was amazed that they were all being so nice to me. It didn't make any like it didn't make any sense. I mean, they were treating me like a peer, or that's what it felt like in the moment. And I had no reference point for that kind of relationship.
Wow. Interesting.
Um, yeah, it was very emotionally bewildering. Um, but they sent me some of their adult telepaths. Um, yeah, and they just did some real basic, kind of wanted to understand the mental structures that I was using. They wanted me to train some of their people,
Hmm.
uh, basically to receive the Zeta Reticulan training secondhand, I guess.
I see.
I mean, the Zeta worked with the Soviets as well, so they had direct access too. Um, but
You were a human, though.
yeah, yeah, human.
Yeah, I know. So you were a human who could actually, interact with them and teach them from a human standpoint, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's true. It's much more grounded. It's easier to teach. Yeah.
All right. Did you see them working with the Greys there, or you were just
Um,
interacting with humans?
Very occasionally. Mostly I was just dealing with humans.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
So how
Um,
long did you spend there on their base? Did you? I mean, it was all
so
on the same station,
um
near Saturn.
most of it was in that place. Yeah.
Okay.
I think they were worried about people trying to steal me or something. So so they kept me in a restricted area of the base. I wasn't traveling around a lot. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. And like, you know, only people with like high clearance could come in um to those areas where I was. So,
So what was your work about then?
well, I mean the short answer is I don't know. Um, because they weren't necessarily sharing the goals with me. They just would ask for different pieces of information like, you know, how does this piece of technology work, and just ask me to hold a mental image of it,
Mm.
sometimes for hours. And they would have their telepaths look at it and they would take a lot of notes. Then they were testing some of their new technology with me, asking me to use it. And some of the things were really cool. I mean, I guess I can say that. They 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 had this device with these kind of steel handles that you'd grasp,
Hmm.
um, almost like a bicycle handlebar, kind
Hmm.
of inverted, and you'd hold these things, and it it reacted to a lot of different information, including physical stuff like the temperature of your hands, and
Hmm.
um, it basically it was intended to help people enter the more subtle states that they would need to be in,
Okay.
um, to use the Zeta stuff. Um, and it was like a almost like a parts of it were kind of like an EMDR thing, where it's like, you know, bilateral stimulation.
Hmm.
So you'd get different charges through your hands.
Hmm.
Um, and the idea was like you balance internally these charges that are coming through you. Um, they had a lot of like kind of somatically based technology like that.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, and they had a lot of research. I mean, they were doing more research than the Americans, like about some of the psychic phenomena because they were interested in it for its own sake, you know.
Okay.
Like the Americans just were interested in what they could do with things, you know, immediate application. And the Russians seemed to be interested also just in exploration, and that was new to me too. It's like, what do you mean you just want to know? Like this isn't yeah. Because I'm making them sound comparatively very good, which was my experience. But um, yeah, I wish I had more concrete stuff. Yeah, I'm open to more questions.
It's okay. Can you describe the place, the base? How many people were there?
Yeah,
Approximate size? What did it look like and stuff?
yeah.
Oh.
So the base, kind of like some of their ships, it was um more boxy. It had right angle, kind of diamond shaped walls, flat on the top and the bottom, long corridors, um lots of like steel looking material, and um long hallways, um and a lot of this just kind of, you know, the Soviet style uh like
Me, me,
decor. I mean, it wasn't super obnoxious, but you know, the uniforms, like uh you know, they were kind of that drab gray green, and like,
mhm.
yeah, hammer and sickle pins, and like over the doorways you'd have these, some, you know, sometimes these elaborate designs of just, you know, CCCP type
Mhm.
things.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and it was uh, sometimes it made me think of a train station. um it was divided into, if I remember correctly, kind of three different bigger sections. um and um I was towards the rear, which I think was more towards the engines, or the core of the station. Um, and
So this was a base or a station? Was it built into a rock or was it floating on
it
the?
was anchored to the rock. Yeah,
Okay.
it was part of the rock.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Like on the inside, or was it like on the surface of some heavenly
it had
body?
a yeah, it had underground layers, but it was also out on the surface. Yeah.
Right. On one of the asteroids, you're saying, right?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And it was the asteroid was anchored on the Saturn's orbit, so it was stable, more or less.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Hmm.
Wow. So how many people were there?
I would guess somewhere around 700 people, probably,
Oh, wow.
in the parts that I saw. Yeah, probably more. But in terms of what I saw, probably about that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, on a daily basis, I had my own bunk, and yeah, I was actually allowed to sleep through the night, which it's like another new experience. The conditions of physical deprivation at Montauk, and some of the American installations beyond that, were just, you were just kept in a constant state of exhaustion and hunger, and you know, all this very, you know, brutal kind of stuff. Um, but anyway, on the Russian base, yeah, I had my own bunk. I um slept the whole night through. They did have, they had this setup where they like basically wired me in, and you know, I had these kind of patches on my head and wires going different places.
Hmm.
They were looking at brain waves and things. Yeah, I mean, they had a lot of like just amenities. They had like you know, gym and a mess hall, and um I was allowed to go certain times, like with an escort, out into the main part of the station. They had a really cool gym. They had, remember these like giant like steel rings that were suspended, and like gymnastics
Hmm.
things that were there. That was fun. Yeah, on it. So basically, they seem to run things over a period of a few weeks at a time. So, um, like if some of the telepaths were interviewing me, it would be pretty much the same people for a few weeks.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, we would go pretty much most of the day. Um, and yeah, I would just try to be open with them. Um, uh, and the Americans also were trying to get me to get information from the Russians.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I didn't really get anything that was seemed very interesting to me. Um,
So the people on the base, the personnel, like were there men and women and families, or were there just, like military
um,
men or researchers?
yeah, mostly men. There were a few women. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, some of the scientists were women. Um, a few families, but I didn't see too much of that. That was like in a separate part of the base, I think.
Hmm.
Um, but they had kids there. I mean, they had um, they had a little school. Um, I didn't see much of it, but I knew it was there. Um, yeah, so it was there were families there. Most of the people I was dealing with were men. I think there were some civilians. I didn't really get to see civilians because they didn't have the clearance to come into the area where I was being held.
Okay.
Um, but occasionally someone would come in under escort. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they had a I think some sort of psychiatrist or psychologist come in who was a civilian. Um, and yeah.
Do you remember any names, maybe? Any
Mm,
particular people that stand out? Just for the recall's sake, I'm just kind of try
yeah.
to.
Yeah. Well, some of them gave me like kind of silly American sounding names so that I could like it wasn't really their name, but I something I would call them. Like there was one guy who wanted to be called Charlie. I'm like, okay, Charlie. Um, but there was an Igor who was one of the psychics. There was a Sergey who was one of the officers. It'd be great if I could like dig up last names and maybe try to look them up or something. If they,
Yeah.
that would be cool. But
An
um,
interesting question, and this is kind of going back. How was this exchange even possible? I mean, assuming that we were in the state of Cold War in the 80s, right? So,
well, the Cold War was basically made up. I mean,
hmm.
it's all for show. I mean, the Luciferians control the planet. The Luciferians run the United Nations. I mean, it's all the like conflict that we're supposed to get so upset about, it's all manufactured. It's totally fake. I mean, for
Hmm.
the most part. So, people get into it, but um, I mean, Saturn essentially, like all the different countries have bases around Saturn because that's the center of a lot of the satanic power, a lot of the Luciferian infrastructure, Illuminati stuff
Okay,
is on Saturn in that area. So all the different nations are basically paying tribute
I
to the
see.
to
Is
the
there
satanic forces.
is there any
Yeah,
kind of quote unquote sacred site for them to go to, or
absolutely.
there
Yeah.
is? Okay,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole other
all right.
can of worms. But yeah, some of the experiences I have on Saturn, I'm not exactly sure what dimension they're in because they're I- um the 3D planet is very has very intense physical conditions, obviously, but I've also been down to what I perceived to be the surface,
Hmm.
um, and it wasn't. It was a place where you could be, and um, this may have been on a higher dimensional level or something, um, but they have a lot. Yeah, the Satanists have a lot going on there. They worship basically this black cube or black sun, most of them. So there are some areas of Saturn where they have set up these essentially enormous cubes that you
Hmm.
can enter into. Um, and um, that's one form of it. Um,
I see.
yeah.
So, the other bases around the rings and stuff, have you been on them on different assignments and
Um,
stuff? Okay.
yeah, mostly the American and the Russian ones are the ones that I saw.
Hmm.
But um, but I was also aware there was a Japanese one. Yeah, there was a German one. I think there was one that was Indian. Yeah, primarily the bigger, wealthier nations.
Yeah, did you guys have exchanges while you were at the Russian base? Did you have any contact with other bases or other groups? Did you see any other
Um,
groups, ships and stuff?
we did. Yeah, the Germans were in and out a lot. The Germans and the Russians seem to have very complex working relationships. And
The
well, I guess that would
Germans,
be
the Germans as in Nachtwaffen or the Germans from Earth?
uh, both, I believe.
Okay,
Yeah, um, yeah, both.
I
Um,
see.
I I guess at that period, some of them would be East German. So, and that would be why they were there, because
Hmm.
they'd be part of the Soviet
Okay. Yeah,
base. Yeah,
interesting.
that's probably it. Yeah.
Wow. Any exchanges with the Americans while you were at that base, or did they keep
Um,
separately?
not many. They sent people to check on me from time to time.
Oh, I see.
Um, I just remember being terrified. There was a Air Force Air, Air Force colonel who had come in and that I had known before, and like every time he would visit, I would just like my heart would just close.
My God.
Um,
One of the
but
abusers?
yeah, one of the
Okay.
abusers.